Wow, what a beautiful day here in Buffalo. I love it because people have this misconception that Buffalo is just like an igloo. And so you meet people from other parts of the country and they just try to make fun of you. And they don't realize our summers are gorgeous. They're a little short, don't get me wrong. And we don't really have much of a spring, I get that. But when summer really hits in Buffalo, summer hits. So glad you're here, excited to have you here, excited for what God has in store for us tonight. I don't know about you, but I really appreciate a review class. I really appreciate in a series in which you're watching, and I know it's not you really need to know it when you're binge watching, but I do appreciate previously on, right, in the summary of the previous episode. So I tend to do that in my messages, and so we've been going somewhere for the month of June. And really what we've been doing is we've been tracking with this giant in the Old Testament scriptures known as Moses, where God had a plan for his life and used him in a remarkable way. And sometimes you and I, we can fall into this trap where we think that's for someone else and that's not for ourselves, but that's just simply not the case. And while the plan for Moses' life isn't exactly the plan for your life and my life, that there is a plan, and that God does want to use you and I in a way in which what could possibly change someone's life, change your world, change the world. So we've been looking at Moses, and so we started off with his birth story, right? That this baby, this no ordinary child, survived a mass genocide. But he had his own issues. He was a stranger in a strange land because he was a Jewish boy that was brought up in an Egyptian empire. And he had struggles with that, and we saw that, where he wasn't necessarily accepted by the Egyptians, nor was he necessarily accepted by the Israelites. But he had this aching in his heart that God saved him and wanted to use him for a reason. And so he didn't know exactly what that was, but he had a false start. He jumped a little too soon. He thought God wanted to use him to rescue and redeem and free the people of Israel, but he kind of jumped too early, and he committed murder, and then he had to run for his life, and then he sat for the next 40 years kind of by a well and building another life, thinking maybe he had blown his shot, maybe he had blown his opportunity, that God had a plan for his life, but he had to get it that one time and he didn't, and maybe he missed out on that. But then he has this incredible experience. He's walking one day and he sees this bush that is on fire, but it's not being consumed by the flames. That's right, this is Mother of Dragons before Mother of Dragons even existed. And so curiosity led Moses back to God, which is so cool with the story of the burning bush, that curiosity led this man to God. So I'm here to tell you tonight, regardless of what your spiritual background is, no matter how skeptical you are, that if you're searching for God, that God is also searching for you. There's going to be an intersection that happens where you're going to meet God, that if you seek God with all your heart, that you will find God. That's what I love about the story of the burning bush, is that curiosity led Moses to God, which led Moses back to the plan that God had for him, right? And so in the burning bush, God's like, hey, I'm going to send you to Pharaoh, and you're going to free the people. And Moses is like, listen, I already blew this once. I'm not your guy. I made my mistakes. I've got my past. And God's like, no, it doesn't matter. I'm going to do it. Don't worry. I'm the Lord God who made you. I know I can use you. And so then Moses goes, and we see this incredible series of events that we know as the Exodus, where Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, listen, you've got to let this group of people, the Israelites, go. You need to set them free. They're no longer your property. They're no longer going to be used to build your empire. You've got to set them free. And so we see a number of miracles that happen, right? A number of supernatural things that happen, and then they culminate with God parting a sea, the Red Sea, through Moses. An incredible spiritual event happened. You ever have that in your life? You ever have an instance where like you just had this experience with God and it was unmistakable, just absolutely remarkable, it forever changed your life? For me, that happened on a weekend retreat as a teenager, where I heard about Jesus and what Jesus had done for me, right? I had those experiences on like a missions trip where I saw God in such a new light, where I had this experience, right? And it changed my life, but this experience was kind of like, it was an emotional high, right? And then I had to step into the everyday, mundane life. That's tough, right? That can be challenging. We always wish that all of our experiences in life and our walk with God is just a series of mountaintop events, but the reality is the valleys do exist. And quite often God wants to use the strength of your faith in the mountaintop experiences to get you through the valleys, to get you through what we would call the wilderness, what we see here with this group of people, the Israelites. Because they step out of bondage and slavery into what we call the wilderness. Now, they know they're going somewhere. God's promised them that, but they haven't experienced it yet. And I don't know about you, but I find it not that crazy to see that maybe these Israelites had wrong expectations. Like they just saw a number of miracles, and maybe perhaps they thought, oh, this is going to be a smooth, easy ride. Like we're going to see God work in so many incredible ways. This isn't going to be days where it feels like we're lost or alone in the wilderness. And we all know what happens when you and I have wrong expectations, whether that's the wrong expectation in a job or in a relationship. When you and I have wrong expectations or unmet expectations, what happens? Fear, anger, doubt, resentment, rebellion. And so we see this group of people, and it's easy for you and I to say, well, hey, they just saw God part a Red Sea, so why, not too far after that, are they starting to doubt God and his plan? But in a lot of ways, you and I, man, we do the same exact thing, but we have this group of people that God rescued from slavery, known as the Jewish people, the Israelites, and they're stuck in wilderness, and they're wondering, like, who's going to provide for us, and ultimately, who's going to guide us to get to where we want to go, because we don't want to stay here. So let's talk tonight for a few minutes about the wilderness, and let's first talk about God's provision in the wilderness. How God provided for these people. We see this in Exodus chapter 16. The Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. That evening quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes, like frost on the ground, appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, what is it? Now in the scriptures we see that this is going to be identified or called manna, which literally means, what is it? So that's literally the word they gave for this piece, this flake, this piece of bread is, what are we going to call this? We're going to call it, what is it? Okay? For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, it is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent. That's the amount. The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little. And when they measured it by the omer, the one who gathered much didn't have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. Everyone had gathered just as much as they needed. And so God says, I'm going to take care of your hunger. Like, you need food to exist, so I'm going to take care of that. So you're going to get some meat. It's quail. You might not get it, every time you want it. You might be in the mood for tacos on Tuesdays, but that's not always going to happen, right? You can get a little grumpy about that. But I'm going to give you meat, and I'm also going to give you bread. And this would fall from heaven. It would be manna. But here's the thing. Anytime they were given either meat or manna, it would only last for that day. So if people tried stashing manna, like, all right, I don't know, maybe tomorrow I don't necessarily feel like gathering, or maybe tomorrow something might not, come, or God might not fulfill his promise tomorrow in terms of, so like if someone wanted to stash like manna in their pockets, in their tent or whatever, wouldn't work. People tried it. We actually read that later on in that chapter. But guess what happened when they tried to do that? In the morning it would be filled with maggots. Right. So God's like, no. You can't save this. You can't stash things. This is day by day faith and trust that I will provide for you. Let's talk about God's guidance in the wilderness in terms of how do I get there? What's God's GPS in terms of going from slavery to this promised land where they can have safety and a life God has for them? We see this in Numbers chapter 9. Whether by day or by night, whenever the cloud lifted, they set out. Whether the cloud stayed over the tabernacle or the tent for 2 days or a month or a year, the Israelites would remain in camp and not set out. But when it lifted or raised, they would set out. At the Lord's command they encamped, and at the Lord's command they set out. They obeyed the Lord's order in accordance with his command through Moses. So, a cloud would hang out over the tent or the tabernacle. When it was lifted, they were to go. But when it settled in, they were supposed to make camp. Now at night, you're like, how would they see a cloud at night? It's dark. It would actually be a flame, a fire. It would look like a fire in the sky, the scriptures say. But here's the thing. There was no preset schedule. When they got somewhere and encamped, they didn't know how many days they would be there. Sometimes they were only there one night. Sometimes they were there 2 days. But in some instances, they were there a month or even a year. So God's guidance. This wasn't God giving you a list of directions, right? Like you and I can pull up on our phone, like, all right, yeah, I'll follow voice directions, but if I want, I can cheat a little bit and kind of click on the details and see, all right, how many miles am I on this road? They couldn't do that. Day by day, they had to say, all right, we got to stay put. Oh, we got to go now. Here's the thing. They didn't like it. They hated it. They were miserable. But God was teaching them something, a faith with a trust in God, to trust in him day by day, to provide for them, to guide them. Here's the thing. You and I are kind of the same, aren't we? I mean, let's face it. Even the most B-type personality in this room, that's like, well, I'm a flow person, I can go with it, right? Even the most B-type personality in this room, if I were to say, hey, I got a pamphlet right here, I got a little booklet, and in this talks about the next 5 years of your life, and you can read about and know about what's coming for the next 5 years. I would imagine 90-some% of us in this room would take that in a heartbeat. Oh yeah, of course, I want to know, right? We don't like that. But God's like, listen, this is how this faith thing works. When you're talking about putting a full trust or full surrender, where I come to this place where I say, I can't do life without God. I've got to place my life with God. I've got to place this trust with God. This is how it works, but they didn't like it. So then they start making comments like this in Exodus 16. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. Interesting how the Israelites preferred the predictability, the familiarity, and even in some ways the comfort of slavery to the freedom found in faith, in having to trust God day by day. I wonder if you and I would fall into that same trap. I wonder if you and I at times in our life fall in that same trap. But think about it. You thought, listen, I had no value as a human being. My only value came to me building brick and mortar buildings, to me building pyramids. That was my entire value. And if I could do that at a quick enough rate, then you know what? I was worth something. But if I couldn't, or I got hurt, or I got injured, or I busted up my back, I'm not worth much. Like, their humanity was stripped from them. You can read stories about prisoners of war. Or you can read stories about World War II when people stuck in concentration camps that had their humanity stripped from them. When they were released, when they found their freedom, they had to rediscover what it meant to be human again. And these people, they were preferring the predictability to slavery, to someone owning them and telling them what to do day in and day out, to being someone's property. They were preferring that to the freedom that led them to have to trust God day by day with providing for them or guiding them. I wonder if you and I fall in that trap, if you and I prefer the old way of life, the old way of thinking, that God has already exposed, that we already know not to be true, but you and I fall into it because it's familiar. It's what we know. Maybe it's a wrong thinking, a bad thinking about ourselves or about how the world works, and we fall back into that because it's familiar, because it's predictable, because it's what we've known. Sometimes we feel like what we've known is all we ever will know, and God's saying, no, I got something new, but you gotta trust me. And that's what this is all about, is learning what it means to walk by faith in this life. And that's the reality, is that life is filled with wilderness. Is it not? For those of us who maybe are coming close to graduating, you might have a wilderness right now in terms of, when am I gonna land a job in the field in which I went to school for? For those of you maybe who've even graduated a year or two ago and are still waiting for that breakthrough in terms of stepping in to the career that you're most passionate about, and you're waiting. I have those discussions a number of times with a number of different people throughout the years here at Vintage, even some of them being e-group leaders here, our small group leaders, that get a degree and then wait. And they're like, hey, Jay, I want to keep being a small group leader, but like I'm looking for jobs anywhere in this country. So I don't know what my future holds. That's the wilderness right there. Maybe some of you, you've got a wilderness in other areas of your life, not just your career. Maybe it's even your program right now. You had a tough year. You're not so sure. You're wondering, man, am I gonna stick this out? Am I gonna continue in this? It's my junior year. I really got to make a decision. Maybe it's with your relationships where you're like, God, I don't really even know. Like, I'm single, but I don't know. I don't really want to be single, but at the same time, I don't want to look desperate, right? Working through that. We all have a wilderness. And God's invitation is, do it with me. Walk with me. I'm not going to give you all the answers. Why? Because if I give you all the answers, you're going to stop depending on me. You're going to think you got this. And that's what we do. We still do that. Even not having all the answers, we still have a tendency to take everything back in our own hands and say, yeah, God, I got this, thanks. Like you gave me life, Jesus, and whatever, and now I'm going to go live it. And we fall into that so easily. But we see how this pressure of people not being able to handle this day-by-day trust in God in the wilderness, we see this really weighing on the leader, Moses. And he does this for 40 years. And he gets exhausted. He gets lonely. So we see this. Moses at a breaking point in Numbers chapter 11, verses 14 and 15. He's just being absolutely honest with God. He says this, I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me. If this is how you are going to treat me, please go ahead and kill me. If I have found favor in your eyes, and do not let me face my own ruin. He's like, God, I can't even, this is too much for me to bear. I can't do this. You know what? Like, grace in my life right now would be to just, like, kill me, get rid of me. Someone else can do this. We see even earlier, he starts to even blame God. Like, hey, God, like, these aren't my kids. I didn't birth any of them. Like, these aren't my people. Like, you asked me to do this. Like, I can't handle these people. They're grumbling. And we see that time and time again, that people are grumbling. People aren't happy and they're talking. Of course, that never happens in the context of today, right? In groups and organizations and communities where people just grumble and are never happy. Of course, that's only in the Old Testament. But we even see really a moment of absolute isolation for Moses. In Numbers 12:1-2, it says, Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife, for he had married a Cushite. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses, they asked? Hasn't he also spoken through us? And the Lord heard this, which isn't a good thing, by the way, the Lord hearing this. So Miriam and Aaron, brother and sister of Moses. On the leadership team, each had leadership roles. And if we remember, Miriam is the sister that saved him when he was put in the basket and sent down the river. That was Miriam. And then Aaron, his brother, helped with leadership as well. And things were getting so bad, there's so much grumbling, that now it even seeps up to the top and the leadership starts to crack, right? And so Miriam and Aaron, they're really not happy the reason they're not happy about Moses is because they think like Moses is the only one who gets to talk to God. But they use something else, right? So they talk bad about him because he has a Cushite wife, right? Which is interesting in this context because the land of Cush was Ethiopia. So Moses' wife was an African, completely different race. Very, very progressive. In a piece of literature this old, by the way. And God's approval, which is pretty neat. But they're using that, and they're saying, oh yeah, you know what, he married a foreigner, he married someone of another ethnicity, but in reality, they're just jealous because they're like, wait, does God only speak to Moses? But that's kind of what happens when people start grumbling and it kind of seeps to the top, everything kind of starts to crumble. We kind of saw that with my favorite basketball team, the Los Angeles Lakers this season. Right? Tragic Johnson just quits out of nowhere, and then all of a sudden just flames ensue, and then people are like, well, they got Anthony Davis. Oh, wait, their GM doesn't know how the salary cap works. But hey, listen, 6 p.m. this Sunday, free agency is happening. Next week is exciting, so we'll see what happens for the Showtime Lakers. I'm hoping for big things. But imagine the loneliness that Moses felt being the leader of this group of people. It's a great reminder to you and I that following God and the path that God has for you and the life that God has for you is bound to bring loneliness at times. And I even remember just a year ago, I stepped into this role. I'm not going to lie, like, being the college pastor of Vintage is like a dream job for me. Like, someone could come and offer me another gig, and I can't imagine any other job I would take at this stage in my life. Like, I really can't. But I stepped into this last summer, and I just had this feeling for weeks and even months of this loneliness. It was just very real. Quite often, stepping into what God has for you can bring about loneliness. And you start to question, God, like really? This is really what you have for me? This is what you want for me as Moses did with God? And then you start to feel at times alienation from people around you. All because you're just following God and they don't want to do it. It's a great reminder for you and I tonight. But Moses didn't know something. He had no clue about something, but he said it and recorded it because God told him, and he did not even know all that this statement meant. Moses says this in Deuteronomy 18:15. He says this, "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your fellow Israelites. You must listen to him." And Moses had no idea that statement started. That statement started this thought process throughout the rest of the Old Testament scriptures that God was going to send a new prophet, a new Moses that is going to do something remarkable. And he had no idea that was an absolute prophecy / prediction of Jesus and who Jesus was. Think about this. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness. So Jesus, as he comes onto the scene, spends 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness, right? Think about it. Moses was on Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments. And then Jesus comes with the Sermon on the Mount, the fulfillment of what Moses was establishing. Think about Jesus being the manna or bread of life, as we see in the wilderness when he says, listen, man cannot live on bread alone. I have come to fulfill that craving that comes back every day in terms of hunger. I've come to fulfill your spiritual hunger for good, to complete that. Jesus, who says to the Pharisees, and they literally try to kill him because of it, he says 2 words, I am. Before Moses was, I am. The same I am that was at the burning bush. And Moses says, okay, you want me to go? What's your name? What do I call you? He says, go and tell Pharaoh. Go and tell all the Israelites, I am sent me. Jesus, the new Moses, the new I am. He had no idea that he was the precursor, that his life would set the stage hundreds of years later, set the stage for the Messiah, the Savior of the world. But it didn't feel good all the time. It didn't always feel good to have that staff. He felt like a stranger in a strange land, doubting himself, doubting God's call on his life, doubting everything. But I think an even more pertinent question for you and I tonight is this. What is your Egypt? What is it in your life? What is it that looks to have a hold on you, to strip you away from your humanity, to strip you away from what the scriptures say, your imago Dei, being created in the image of God, that you have God's thumbprint on your life, that God has this plan for your life that we read in Acts 17, that God has placed you here for a very specific purpose. And you're not going to know it, and you're not going to know it ahead of time, and you might not even know what tomorrow looks like. But God is saying, just trust me with today. Just trust me with today. But what is your Egypt? Is it an old pattern in your life that God has set you free from, but at times you just want to run back to it? What is your Egypt? Is it a pattern of thinking that you developed, a wrong thinking, that God's saying, hey, let me renew your mind. Let me refresh your mind. Let me clean that out, as it says in Romans 12. What is your Egypt that wants to hold you back from all that God has for you? I don't know what your Egypt is. I just know I have one. And so my assumption is you probably do too. But God's invitation is to step out of that. And that might mean stepping into the wilderness where you feel alone, isolated, not sure what's next. It doesn't feel all good. God says, trust me, there's good on the other side of this. And in the meantime, I'm going to use the wilderness to build your faith so that you can become who you're supposed to be, so you can learn what it means to depend on me, so you can learn this real life dependence. You have a real relationship with a real God that helps you in real life situations. God says, I want that for you. I want that for all of you. So what is your Egypt? What do you have to leave behind? God wants you to step right into it. He wants you to step out of that slavery. The slavery to sin, the slavery to your old life, the slavery of everything that is wrong and false. He wants you to step in. Step into this faith journey with him. And he says it's not always easy, but I'm telling you, it's always worth it. And we see it's never easy in here. But everyone who steps into it, they always draw the same conclusion. It's always worth it. Always worth it. If you would, please, pray with me tonight. Thank you so much for your attention. I appreciate it. I'm not sure what God brought to your heart or to your mind tonight, but talk with Him about it. He brought you here for a reason. I don't know exactly what that is. Cool thing is, I don't even need to know. I simply just have to share God's word and let God do His work. Maybe you're here tonight. When I talk about this concept of having a relationship with God, this relationship with Jesus, and you've never found yourself in a place where you've invited Christ into your life, where you've invited Jesus into your life so that He can give you new life. I'd love to help you with that tonight. So right where you are, that can start with a simple prayer. I was in a service just like this, and I said a prayer that I'm about to share with you, and it changed my life. My life wasn't easier. I did have to step into a wilderness. I did have to learn what it meant to step away from other things. That was a process for me. It felt like 40 years. I'm telling you, it's absolutely worth it. So if you find yourself in a place here tonight where you want to invite Jesus into your life, just say a prayer like this. You don't even have to say it out loud because God can hear your thoughts. Say this: Dear God, I recognize I need a new life. And Jesus has come to give me it. So the scriptures say that Jesus came and died for me. And God, I believe it. The scriptures say that Jesus died to give me a new life. God, I believe it. God, the scriptures say that all I have to do is turn away from the things that are trying to enslave me and turn to Jesus. God, so I do that right now. I don't want to be in Egypt. God, I want to be with you. Heads bowed, eyes closed, no one looking around. This is a personal moment. But if you said that prayer, I'm going to ask you to do something bold. You're in a safe place. I just want to pray over you, and I want to get something in your hand. So if that was you tonight, would you do something so bold as to just raise your hand and look right at me? Not everyone has their heads up, so not everyone's going to see you. But I understand it takes some courage. It takes a bold move. I get it. But I just want to pray over you, and I want to get something in your hand that I believe will help you in that. I see you. Could you just keep your hand up? Awesome. Anyone else? I see you. If you would just keep your hand up. Right on. I see you. Keep your hand up. That's right on. Right on. I told you, you're absolutely in a safe place. So many people in this room. So many of us have been in a place just like this. So let me pray for these that I see. That hands are being raised. Keep your hands up. God, I pray for those who have their hands in the air right now. God, I see hands, but more importantly, you see hearts. God, I pray that you would be so unmistakable, so undeniable. They would sense that you're coming for them, God. Thank you, Jesus, for your pursuit of us. Those who have their hands up, if you just look at me one quick second. I got something I want to get in your hands. You don't sign up for anything. You're not joining anything. We're not a club. You're not joining this church, anything like that. My leaders have a book that they're going to explain to you how it'll help you in a journey, a faith journey, how to follow God each and every day. So they're going to explain that to you. So they're next to you right now, and they're going to get that in your hands. They just want to explain it to you. We're about to sing a song, so they're just going to explain it to you in the cafe area. You're not going in the corner of the building. You're not going anywhere that's scary. And if you're more comfortable and you came with someone, bring them with you. Bring them with you. But they're just going to take a couple minutes. They're going to explain that to you, and they're just going to pray for you one more time. God, for the rest of us. There's an Egypt that chases us down, that comes after us, that looks to enslave us, that looks to strip away our humanity, that looks to strip away the freedom that we can have in Jesus, that looks to strip away the divine purpose with which we were created. God, sometimes those chains in Egypt, God, sometimes those feel more familiar or feel more comfortable than freedom in you. God, help us to discern what is life-giving and what is life-taking. And may we run away from Egypt so we can find the life that you have for us, even if that means We start off in the wilderness. Heads bowed, eyes closed. We do this most weeks, but we're going to respond with a couple songs. But as always, I'm going to open up the altar in front of the stage right here. If God's doing something in your heart, maybe it has something to do with your Egypt, or maybe it has something different, but you got something heavy on your heart, feel free. Sometimes, just stepping up in a room like this and stepping up in front and getting on our knees and just praying before God, it just does something. And I'm going to ask some of our coaches and some of our leaders to come up front too. And if you got a burden and all you'd like is for someone to pray over you, just raise your hand when you come up front here. Just put your hand in the air. One of our leaders is not going to ask any questions. Just led by the Spirit, they're just going to place their hand on your shoulder and just going to pray over you. That's open for you. And so you can respond by standing and singing. You can respond by coming to the front. Or you can respond by just sitting right now where you're at and just meditating and thinking on what God spoke to you about tonight. You can do however you want. We're just glad you're here because we know God wants to meet with you. And he can do that right now.